Hey everybody, so I want to post a video that tells us a little bit more about how to take a basic 1-bar backbeat, what we learned last time in part 1 of programming a drum beat in Pro Tools, and how we can take that basic 1-bar backbeat and we can start to expand it and make it longer and use variation and repetition and effects and compression and velocities and all kinds of other little bells and whistles and tricks that are going to make it into a beat that's unique, that you really like. Okay? So first off, before we get into this video, you should have already watched Programming a Drum Beat in Pro Tools. You can do a search for this in Google, and the first one that comes up is the video that I made, part 1 of this series. Make sure that you take a look at this.
Hey, what's up everybody?
This is weird because we have a video within a video that both have me talking about the video, which is kind of crazy. But anyway, make sure that you have watched this 10-minute tutorial first. You don't actually have to do what I am doing, although you can. Mostly it's to understand the basics of a backbeat. Okay? Once you've completed watching this, then we're going to go into part 2. Okay? Alright, so let's go ahead and open up Pro Tools. And I've got my menu open up here across the top, and I'm going to go to File, New Session, and I'm going to make a blank session. These settings are fine as they are. And as always, I'm going to call this first name dot last name dot 4-bar backbeats. Okay, 4-bar backbeats. And I'll explain what I mean by that in just a second. Okay. And here's my empty Pro Tools session. Okay? Now, some things that we want to set up before we go any further, just to double check that we have everything. Here's one. We want to make sure that we are in grid mode for our editing. Anytime that we're working with bars and beats, we really want to be utilizing grid mode. Next, we want to make sure that our grid is set to 16th notes. Okay? Then we also want to make sure that we have a bars and beats ruler across the top, and that it's selected, not minutes and seconds, not samples, but bars and beats. Okay? If for some reason we don't have the bars and beats ruler, we can click on this little guy here that looks like a bookcase, and we can make sure that it's checked. Alright? Once it's checked, just make sure it's highlighted. That way we can use the bars and beats ruler of Pro Tools as a guide for making our beat. Okay? Alright, now we have to set ourselves up for being able to make a drum beat, and that means making an instrument track. So we're going to start off by doing Command-Shift-N. We could also do Track New to do this. And we're going to make a stereo instrument track. And then we have these inserts here that I'm going to put a drum set on. Remember, if we don't have inserts, you can always click right here on the other little thing that looks like a bookcase right above the track and just make sure that inserts is selected. Okay? Alright, so I click on this track. I'm going to do multi-channel plugin, instrument, expand to. And then in expand to, I'm going to tell expand to become a drum set by going to the top where it says factory default, going to drums, number 26, and picking a kit. Now, don't worry too much about what kit you pick right now. You can always change it later after you've made your beat. Okay? I'm going to choose Urban Monkey. Whoops, I chose the wrong thing. My crossover loop is definitely not what I want. Urban Monkey, because I like cities and monkeys. Alright, so now we've got an instrument track, we've got an expand on that track, and we've got a drum set. We're ready to start making a backbeat. To do that, I'm going to go to the MIDI Editor. Now, if you don't remember the shortcut, you can always look it up by going to Window, MIDI Editor, and that little upward pointing arrow means Control. So Control equals is going to open this up. So I do Control equals, and there's my MIDI Editor. Okay. Now, a quick reminder about where the drums are. Our kick is going to be right here on the keyboard where it says 1. And you can hear that. Boom. Alright, so here's my kick. Here's my snare. And here's my closed hi-hat, another closed hi-hat, and an open hi-hat. Okay? These are really the only 5 notes that we need to use to make a backbeat. You can use other notes, but these really have to be the main notes that we're going to use to get a decent sounding backbeat. Okay? I'm just putting them in these columns here so we can see what they all are. So I'm going to actually get rid of them all again. This is just so you can remember where they are. Take one more quick look. Okay, and bye-bye. All right, so let's remind ourselves what we do to have a basic template of a backbeat. The first thing that we need for a backbeat is a kick on the 1. There it is. The next thing that we need is a snare on the 2 and the 4. Okay? The third thing we need is a steady repeating hi-hat. Now let me show you what I mean by a steady repeating hi-hat. Incidentally, before we go any further, let's just double check that we have these things set correctly. My grid should be glowing green. It should say 00240 here, which is 16th notes. If that's not checked, go ahead and check it. And I should be in grid mode, okay? So one more time, make sure that you have grid button lit, 240 right here, 16th notes, and your grid for your editing mode, okay? Cool. All right, so what do I mean by steady repeating hi-hat? I mean that whatever I do in these first 4 columns, I should repeat it in the next 4 and the next 4 and the next 4. So maybe I would do that. What did I do? The first and third of those 4 columns. So I can continue to do first and third, first and third, first and third. Whoops. That's steady because what it's doing right here is the same as what it's doing right here in each beat, okay? But of course I could pick something else also. I could do this, the second and third. Then do that in each group of 4. Okay? So as long as, it doesn't even have to be 2. It could be just 1. It could be like that. As long as whatever is happening in this first 4 beats is repeated, in the first 4 subbeats, first 4 16th notes, is repeated in the next 16th notes and the ones after that. Okay? That steadiness of your hi-hat is what's going to keep your dancer and your listener in the groove of your beat. Okay, if that's our basic template, what can we do to kind of add some stuff to this and make it our own? As we saw in the last video, the next thing that usually happens is that we place some more kicks other than where we have the snares. Okay? So anywhere else except on the 2 and the 4 have some kicks. Okay? Usually there are some kicks at the very least around the 3. So maybe I could do this. Okay? I've added 3 more kicks. Maybe I'll even add 1 more. Let's hear what that would sound like so far. Here we go. Maybe I don't really like the way that feels, so I kind of move them around and try a different pattern. Maybe I like that better. Okay, I think that's pretty cool, but maybe I want the hi-hats on every other 16th note. No, I liked it better before. Okay? So I'm going to go with this as my basic beat. Okay? Alright. So the question is now, how do I start to kind of develop this into a longer beat? Right? If I just play this over and over, and I'm selecting here and hitting play to hear this repeat, if I just play this over and over, I'm going to get bored eventually. Okay? So the key here is that in order to turn a 1-bar backbeat into something that's more interesting, that lasts a little bit longer, we're going to use 2 ideas: repetition and variation. These are the 2 key concepts. So I want some repetition and some change. All right, having those 2 elements, it's really what going to make your music both interesting to listen to, but also that has kind of a steady groove that people can get on and sort of ride like a boat down a river, to use a metaphor. Okay, so how do I do that? Well, what I'm going to do is select what I have already, and I'm going to change it from 1 bar into 4 bars. And the way that I'm going to do that, after I selected my notes, and notice that I've selected here from the second bar back to the beginning. Okay, so to go again, I went up to where it says 2-1. I clicked and dragged to select all of those notes that I just made. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is zoom out a little bit using the R key, and I'm going to duplicate this 3 times. And the way that I could do duplicate is by hitting Command D. Okay, so Command D duplicates, Command D duplicates, Command D duplicates. Okay. Now I have 4 bars here: first bar, second bar, third bar, fourth bar. And what I'm going to do is turn this into a pattern that's called A, B, A, C. All right. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, the ABAC means that the first and the third bars are going to be exactly the same. They're both going to be called loop A, bar A. Okay. The second bar and the fourth bar are going to be similar but a little different, both from loop A and from each other. That's where I'm going to get my repetition and my variation within this beat. Okay. So how do I do that? Well, usually there's a couple things we can do. One, the main change usually happens in the kick. So I could change the kick a little bit. I'm going to add maybe an extra kick there. And that could be all I do, but maybe I'll also take away a kick. Okay, so let's listen to that again. Let's listen to just those 2. So I'm going to listen to the first 2 bars. First bar, A, B. So I get some variation, but there's also some things repeating and keeping steady. Okay, so I've got my A and I've got my B, right? The third bar is the same as the first, so I leave it completely alone, right? And then finally, the fourth bar is my C bar. I'm going to make that different, but in a different way. So it's going to be different from the first loop, my A bar, and different from the second one that I just made, the B bar, okay? So I am going to change the kicks again here, and maybe I'll do that. Okay, so I've changed my kicks again, and maybe I'm going to also add some other stuff here. I'm going to add an extra snare right at the end, just one extra snare. We want to be careful about adding extra snares because the snare on the 2 and the 4 is really what gives me that feel of a backbeat. Okay? But if you're having it on the 2 and the 4, most of the time you can afford to kind of do a little something different in the fourth bar. And maybe I'm also going to get an open hi-hat here. The open hi-hat, remember, is the third one up there. Okay? All right, so what do we get? Let's listen to the whole thing now. B, A, C, A, B, A, C. Okay, now I can even add, right at the end of the fourth bar, a real common thing that a drummer does is to add a fill. Okay, so at the end of the fourth bar is a good time, if you want to go a little crazy, that's a good time to do it. So maybe I can add some extra kicks and extra drums in there. I can put some toms in there. Let's try maybe that, and I'll even put some extra snares in there. Okay, so that it's really kind of full at the end. Let's listen to it again. A bar, B bar, C bar, A bar, excuse me, C bar with a fill. Okay? And here's the fill. Okay, so just a quick note about this fill stuff at the end. I made this pretty busy at the end, okay? We can do that for short times. If you start doing this to all of your bars, if you start getting lots and lots of drums in there, it gets really busy really quick, and we lose the sense of a clean groove to follow in our song, all right? So I really want to emphasize, make sure that you're thinking not just about the notes that you add, but the silence in between the notes. The silence is as important as the notes themselves. So make sure that you're not just adding more and more and more and more drum parts. It might sound cool to you at first, but when you start trying to add other instruments, it's going to be too full. There's going to be no musical room left anymore. Okay? All right, great. So now we've got our 4-bar ABAC backbeat. Now what I want to do is show you some tricks that you can do to start to change the sound of this a little bit. Okay? Let's start with the velocities. Velocities, if these are these little risers with the diamonds on the top of them right here, and they can be shown by clicking this little arrow right here that opens and closes that lane, right? So if it looks like this and you don't have your velocities, you can go down to this little arrow and click and your velocities open up. Now if this says something else like MIDI pan, you can just click on this and put velocity back. Now the basic idea of velocity is that the height of these things represents how hard the drum is being hit. Okay? Right now they're all the way up, which means that the drums are being hit as hard as they can. Usually that sounds the best. Okay? So what if they aren't that way? What if they all, I'm going to select everything by going Command A here, and I'm going to lower these down. What if it sounded like this? It gets kind of quiet and a little sort of weak sounding. So all I have to do is pull them all the way up. It gets louder, fuller, stronger. Okay? So I'm going to suggest that we, in general, as a default, have our velocities be all the way up. Okay? Incidentally, if you want that to automatically happen when you make notes, go to this window right here and put your default velocity at 127. That's the highest velocity we can have. Okay? So my MIDI note velocity is 127. Every note that I add is going to be all the way up. Okay? All right, but there are some times when it's good to start changing the velocities. It makes your beat sound more human. Okay? So how do I do that? Well, let me give you some examples. When I have two kicks together like this, so at the beginning, boom, boom, ba-boom, that ba-boom, those two kicks hitting together, a nice thing to do is to take the first one and drop the velocity a little bit. Because when a real drummer plays a kick drum and he goes ba-boom, that first one is usually a little bit weaker than the second one. Ba-boom. Quiet, quiet, loud. Okay? So how can I do that? Well, I click on the one note that's happening before, and I can lower the velocity. And you can hear it getting quieter, right? And I'm going to do that with all these. I'm going to hold down Shift to select multiple notes, and every time that I have two of these together like that, I'm going to lower the velocities a little bit. Right? So I'm coming in here and grabbing these, and they go down. Okay? Now I can give a listen to this. So it changes it in kind of dum, ch-bum, ba-bum, ba-bum, instead of dum, ch-bum, da-dun. And it makes it sound more human. Okay? So try playing with velocities. That's my first suggestion. All right? Let me show you another thing that I can do. Let's go to our expand. So I hit Control equals there. Remember, Command equals. Control equals takes me to my MIDI editor. Command equals takes me back to my edit window. Okay? And I'm going to click on my expand to open it up. All right. Now what I want to do is show you how I can change the sound of my drum beat. Okay? One thing that I can do is I can add effects to my drums individually. So let's say that I want to take my snare. This is something that's really common to do. I'm going to take my snare and I'm going to add some reverb to it. All right? How do I do that? Well, here's my snare selector. I can see right there. This is what's controlling the snare sound. And I'm going to come over to where it says FX1 and FX2. And I'm going to turn up FX1 until it's kind of pointing straight up like that. Okay? And now I'm going to come down to the bottom of the expand, and here's FX1. So this is the effect that is going to be, the snare is going to be sent to, and it's going to change the sound of the snare. And I'm going to change this drum room to, to hall, dense hall. Okay? You can use your roller ball to scroll through this, or you can grab this little tab to move it. Okay? And I'm going to do dense hall. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and select this, and I'm going to play it while we listen, right? And we're on loop play here, incidentally. We should always be in loop play to do this work. And that just means that you have this little icon on your loop button, on your play button. If you don't, you can hold down Control and click on it until it shows up. And when I do that, anything that is selected is going to loop around and around and around. Okay? Cool. So I'm going to... And you can hear how that snare gets really big. Okay? Now maybe that's too much. All right? You can reduce the amount of it by lowering down that FX. So I can have a little bit of it or a lot of it. Okay? Now, usually you only want to put that on your snare. A lot of reverb on a kick or on another part of the drums is usually going to sound really weird. But hey, there's no rules in this stuff. Try it and see what you think, okay? So we can change these effects. You know, we can put other effects, and we could put a delay on it, for example. That's kind of a cool effect. So I'm going to come down here and select delay. Maybe, how about a stereo delay? Okay. And then this can create a pretty chaotic effect sometimes, so we have to be kind of careful with this. This is on FX2. So I can turn up the knob for FX2. And notice I'm just going straight up here and straight down to change these knobs. I'm not trying to go around like that. It doesn't work. It's just click and drag up or click and drag down to change that. Okay. So I'm going to turn it up and let's listen. Okay, and you can hear that. You can change that by moving this knob. You can change the type of delay. Click on this again. Get some really interesting effects doing this. Okay, I turn this knob. That's a nice one. Okay, so I can get different delay patterns by turning this knob. Okay, all right. So my second suggestion after playing with velocities, play with effects. See what you can do. You can put these on individual drums, like a clap or a cowbell. All right. And then finally, the last thing that you can try is something called compression. This can make a really neat sort of effect on your drum sound. So I'm going to click here. I'm going to do multi-channel plugin, dynamics, compressor limiter. Okay, so one more time, I'm clicking on a slot underneath my expand, multi-channel plugin, dynamics, compressor. Okay. Now, compression I could do an entire tutorial on just by itself, all right? So I'm not going to go into too much depth on what compression does, except that it is going to make part of the drums louder that you're not really necessarily hearing normally. And let me just give you some settings to get you started on what's going to sound pretty good. First of all, this attack. We want this to be short. I actually usually put it all the way down. Okay. Now, it does depend a little bit on what you're compressing, but most of the time for drums, we want this to be short, a short attack. So we want this to be on the low side of the knob. Okay. I'm just going to put it all the way down. All right. Next, the ratio. Think of this as how much of this compression we want to happen, how much of the effect we want to really happen. The higher the ratio, the more we're going to hear what this sounds like. Usually between 3 and 4, somewhere in there is pretty good. Okay? But again, experiment. See what happens when you make it really high. It can start to sound kind of strange. If I make it really low, it's the same as not having a compressor. 1 to 1, it's the same as not having a compressor at all. Okay? I'm going to put it at 3.5. All right? Then the final thing is we want to raise the gain after we've done this. The last knob we want to turn is this red one. And my suggestion is just that you raise it up until, see this part right here of the white line? Raise it up until this white line is a little bit underneath the top, like this. I'm going to click and start to drag up. The white line's going up and up and up. I do it until it's a little bit underneath this top line right here. Okay? And then I'm going to go ahead and play it. And I'm going to watch my levels on this output. I'm going to make sure that they're not clipping. I'm not going to make sure that they're not turning red. If they are, I'm going to bring my gain down a little bit. Okay, here we go. So I can bring it up even a little bit more. it up to about there. Whoops, it peaks, so I'll bring it down a little bit. And you can hear I've transformed this beat into something that sounds completely different than it used to. It sounds kind of like nastier and kind of dirtier and more messed up and interesting in a lot of ways, more complex. It's also very busy, so it depends. Is this going to work for you or not? It really depends on what else you're going to do with your song. Okay? All right, so here's what I would like you to do now. I would like you to repeat the process that you just saw 3 times and create your own 4-bar drum beat. So you're going to go through all of these steps. First, you're going to make 1 bar like this. Start with 1 bar that has a kick on the 1, a snare on the 2 and the 4, some extra kicks, and some hi-hats. Then duplicate, duplicate, duplicate. So we've got 4 bars all together. See them? First bar, second bar, third bar, fourth bar. Change the second one a little bit. Change the third one, the fourth one a little bit more. Then I get A, B, A, C. Next, experiment with changing velocities. Next, experiment with putting effects on your drums. Finally, experiment with using compression to change the sound of your beat. Okay? Remember that you can also change your tempo so that you can hear these drum beats at different tempos. Sometimes one beat will sound good at one tempo and sound terrible at another tempo. Let's see what this sounds like if I slow it down from 120, which is like a dance kind of tempo, to maybe like a hip-hop sort of tempo, like 85. What does this sound like now? Sounds kind of cool. That delay is starting to get a little irritating to me. I would probably want to turn that down and chill it out because it's awfully aggressive, but who knows, for the right kind of song, maybe like some dubstep or something like that could work, okay? All right, guys, that's the idea. So we're looking for 3 more instrument tracks that look just like this. Change the beat, change the drum set. Your goal is to make these 3 beats all be backbeats, but sound as different from each other as possible. 3 ABAC backbeats that are all as different from each other as possible. All right? Good luck, guys.